Sandra Mercer had not planned to be the last one out of the hospital that night. She had promised herself, after her last double shift, that she would never do it again. She would leave on time, say no to the extra hours, and stop letting the ward pull her back every time someone called in sick. But then one of the younger nurses had started crying in the break room, overwhelmed and exhausted, and Sandra had quietly taken the remaining 4 hours herself without saying a word about it. That was the kind of person she was. The kind who stayed. It was nearly 10 o'clock when she finally pushed through the hospital's side exit and stepped into the parking garage attached to the building. The air inside was cooler than outside, heavy with the smell of oil and concrete. The overhead lights buzzed faintly. A few of them flickered. The garage was mostly empty at this hour, just scattered cars sitting in silence, and the distant hum of the city beyond the open sides of the structure. Sandra walked with her keys already in her hand. She had groceries in a bag over one shoulder. She had stopped at the small shop in the hospital lobby before leaving. Bread, yogurt, a box of tea. Small things. The kind of things that feel important when you are tired enough to forget you still need to eat. She was on her phone for a moment, checking a message from her sister, when she heard the footsteps behind her. She did not think anything of them at first. Parking garages have footsteps. That is simply what they are, concrete chambers that collect and echo sound. But something about these ones made her slow down. They slowed down too. She sped up. They sped up. Sandra turned her head just slightly and caught the shape of a man closing the distance between them. She did not recognize him. He was wearing a dark jacket, head low, moving with the kind of urgency that had nothing to do with being late for somewhere. She opened her mouth to say something, she was not sure what, and then his arm was around her from behind and the blade was at her throat. It happened in the space of a single breath. The grocery bag fell from her shoulder and hit the ground. The tea box split open. She felt the metal against her skin, cold, and very still, and absolutely real, and every thought she had simply stopped. There was no screaming. There was no running. There was only the sound of her own pulse, very loud, and the man's voice low and close behind her ear. Don't move. Don't scream. Give me the bag. She wanted to tell him it had already fallen. She could not find the words. And then, from somewhere ahead of her, not rushing, not charging, just arriving, a pair of boots stopped on the concrete about 15 feet away. A man stood there. Tall, broad through the shoulders, wearing a plain gray shirt and dark jeans. He was holding a paper coffee cup in one hand. He looked at the situation in front of him with an expression that was not shock, and not fear, and not anger. It was something much harder to describe. It was the look of someone who had already begun solving a problem. He set the coffee cup down on the hood of the nearest car. Gently. Like he was setting it on a kitchen table. Then he looked directly at the man holding the knife. Hey, he said. His voice was low and completely level. Let's just slow down for a second. Marcus Hale had come to this hospital to visit his sister. She worked on the administrative floor above, handling patient records, and they had made plans 2 weeks ago to have dinner together. He had arrived a little early, grabbed coffee from the lobby, and taken the elevator down to the garage level to wait by his truck rather than sit in the lobby where the chairs were uncomfortable and the television was always too loud. He had not planned for any of this. But the moment he stepped off the elevator and heard the sharp drop of a bag hitting concrete, his body had already shifted into a different mode. 12 years of training do not switch off. They go quiet, sometimes. They stay in the background while you live a normal life, while you drink coffee and make dinner plans and argue with your sister about what restaurant to pick. But they do not disappear. Marcus had read the situation in about 1 second. Woman. Attacker. Blade against the throat. The attacker was not calm, his shoulders were up near his ears, his breathing was visible even from 15 feet away, and the hand holding the knife had a slight shake to it. Not the shake of a professional. The shake of a man who had gone further than he intended to and did not quite know how to stop. That mattered. A great deal. Marcus did not reach for anything. He had nothing to reach for. He was unarmed, off-duty, and standing in a parking garage in a gray shirt. What he had, instead, was time, or at least the appearance of it. The ability to make 30 seconds feel like nothing urgent at all. My name is Marcus, he said, keeping his eyes on the men with the knife. I'm not a police officer. I'm nobody official. I'm just a guy who was getting his car. He paused. What's your name? The attacker said nothing. His jaw was tight. You don't have to tell me, Marcus said. That's okay. He took the smallest step to the left, not toward them, just a slight repositioning, casual as adjusting your weight. I'm just thinking that nobody here needs this night to go badly. Not her. Not you. Not me. Sandra could feel the arm around her tighten slightly. But the blade had not moved. The man behind her was listening. She could feel that too, a strange stillness in him, as if part of him was relieved that someone was talking. Marcus kept going. Steady. Unhurried. His voice had a quality to it that was difficult to explain. It was not soothing in the way a doctor's voice is soothing, and it was not commanding in the way a police officer's voice might be. It was simply present. Completely and fully present, like there was nowhere else he would rather be and nothing else he needed to do. He talked about small things. He mentioned that the garage lights were annoying, the flickering ones. He said his sister worked upstairs and he was supposed to take her to dinner, but she was probably still at her desk because she was always still at her desk. He smiled slightly when he said it. The man with the knife, Danny Rourke, 27 years old, 3 weeks without work, a restraining order violation already filed against him and a mind that had been narrowing toward a single point of desperate pressure for longer than he would ever admit. Danny Rourke did not lower the blade. But his breathing changed. The very top edge of the rage in him softened, just slightly, in the way that a knot sometimes gives before it fully releases. Marcus saw it. He also saw the moment Danny's eyes moved. A car door slammed somewhere deeper in the garage, a sharp, echoing bang, and Danny's head turned toward it by instinct. Just a fraction. Just half a second. Marcus was already moving. 3 steps, crossing the distance faster than Danny could process, because speed was not the point, timing was the point, and the timing was exact. His hand came down on Danny's knife wrist with a controlled, precise grip, twisting outward and downward in the same motion, and then Marcus pivoted, brought his arm across, and Danny Rourke went to the ground in under 2 seconds. The knife skittered across the concrete and came to rest against the wheel of a parked car. Marcus had one knee on the ground, Danny face down beneath him, arm locked at an angle that was firm enough to hold but careful enough not to break. He had calculated that too, force sufficient, damage minimal. In all his years of training, that had always been the point. Not to destroy. To contain. Danny did not struggle. Something had gone out of him when he hit the ground. He lay still, breathing hard against the concrete, and made no sound at all. Marcus looked up. Sandra was standing against her own car, both hands pressed over her mouth, her eyes very wide. She was shaking. "You're okay," Marcus said. The same voice. The same steadiness. "You're safe now. Can you call 911 for me?" The police arrived in 4 minutes. Sandra had made the call with trembling fingers, dropping her phone once before she got the words out. When the officers came, 2 of them, Marcus was still exactly where he had been, one knee on the ground, Danny secured, speaking to Danny quietly while they waited. Telling him that going still was the right call. That everything would be handled professionally. That no one was going to hurt him. One of the responding officers recognized Marcus before Marcus said a word. They had a brief exchange, professional and quiet, and Marcus explained in precise terms the hold he had applied, why he had chosen it, and the angle of the original threat. He spoke the way someone might describe a sequence of events they had witnessed rather than performed, clearly, without drama, and with a level of anatomical detail that told the officer everything he needed to know about who he was dealing with. Danny Rourke was placed in handcuffs and put in the back of a police vehicle. He did not resist. He did not speak. He stared at the floor of the car with the expression of someone coming back to themselves after a very long time away. Sandra gave her statement to the second officer, her voice still unsteady but her words clear. When she finished, she looked around and found Marcus standing a few feet away, waiting. He was holding his coffee cup again. Somewhere in everything that had happened, he had gone back and picked it up. She almost laughed. It came out as something between a breath and a sound she had no name for. He walked over and sat down on the concrete beside her, not standing above her, not offering a formal hand or a professional shoulder. Just sitting. He shrugged off the jacket he had tied around his waist and held it out to her without a word. She took it and pulled it around her shoulders. They sat in silence for a moment. "Why did you step in?" she asked eventually. Her voice was quiet. "You could have called from a distance. You didn't have to walk up like that." Marcus looked at the concrete in front of him. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. 12 years, he said at last. 12 years of being the person who walks toward the problem instead of away from it. He paused. "I don't think I know how to turn that off." "Were you scared?" she asked. He thought about it honestly. "Not the way you might think. There's a kind of focus that takes over. Everything else goes quiet." He glanced at her. "The scared part usually comes after. Gives you something to feel when it's all over." Sandra looked at him. "Is it coming now?" He smiled, a small, real smile. "Little bit," he said. In the weeks that followed, Sandra found herself returning to that night more than she expected. Not the blade, though she felt it sometimes, cold and sudden, when she was falling asleep or standing at the sink. What she kept returning to was the voice. The absolute, unhurried steadiness of it. The way it had filled the garage without rising. The way it had spoken to Danny, to a frightened, desperate man pressing a knife to her throat, as though Danny was still someone worth the effort of a conversation. She had spent 8 years in pediatric nursing. She knew something about staying composed when things were falling apart around you. She knew the discipline it took to keep your hands steady and your voice level when a child was afraid and the room was full of panic. She recognized what Marcus had done because, in a quieter way, she did a version of it herself every single day. She found his contact through the police report and sent him a message. Short and simple, she wanted to say thank you properly, in person, if he was willing. He replied the next morning. One sentence, "Happy to meet, whenever works for you." They met at a small coffee shop 3 days later. She had expected 10 minutes. An awkward exchange of pleasantries, a handshake, something formal and brief. Instead they sat across from each other for nearly 2 hours and talked about everything, about nursing and what it does to a person over years, about the military and what it gives you and what it costs, about his sister and her terrible taste in restaurants, about the particular exhaustion of caring deeply about strangers for a living. He told her, when she asked, that he had served 3 deployments. That he had been part of operations he could not describe in full. That he had left not because he was broken by it but because he had wanted to build something in the quieter half of his life. He was consulting now, security systems, risk assessment, training. Useful work that used the same mind without the same cost. He did not perform any of this. He spoke about his service the way someone might speak about a chapter of a book they had read carefully and learned from and were glad to have behind them. There was no bitterness. There was no pride of the kind that needs an audience. There was simply a man who had known who he was in one season of his life and was still figuring out who that made him in the next. Sandra told him that the thing she replayed most was the moment he had set the coffee cup down. He looked confused for a second, and then he laughed, a real, surprised laugh, the kind that has no performance in it at all. "I didn't want to spill it," he said. "I know," she said. "That's exactly what I mean." Sandra eventually told the story to a friend who worked in local media. She had not intended for it to go anywhere. But the friend wrote a short piece, posted it quietly, and within 2 days it had found an audience far beyond what anyone had expected. People shared it not because of the takedown, not because of the technique or the speed or the physical precision of what Marcus had done. They shared it because of what came after. Because of a man who sat down on a parking garage floor. Because of a jacket handed over without a word. Because of a voice that had spoken to a desperate, frightened person as though that person was still worth the trouble of being spoken to. Marcus declined every request for an interview. He gave a single statement to the police, considered the matter fully closed, and went back to his life without looking over his shoulder at the story that was quietly building behind him. But one morning, about 6 weeks after that night, a letter arrived through his attorney's office. It had been forwarded from Danny Rourke's legal team. Marcus opened it at his kitchen table, alone, with coffee he actually got to finish this time. The letter was short. It had clearly been written and rewritten several times, the handwriting changed pressure halfway through, and there were words that had been crossed out and replaced with simpler ones. But the final version said what it needed to say. Asterisk, you didn't have to treat me like a person. You did anyway. I don't know what to do with that, asterisk. Marcus read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer of his kitchen desk, beneath some old photographs and a coin he had carried since his first deployment. He did not show it to anyone. Some things are not meant to be shared. They are meant to be kept close, and thought about slowly, and allowed to mean what they mean in private. Sandra drove through that parking garage again on a Tuesday night, 6 weeks after everything had happened. It was the same time of evening, nearly the same shift. She had not planned to think about it, she had, in fact, been thinking about what she wanted for dinner and whether her sister had texted back, and then she was in the spot, the exact same level of the same structure, and she slowed the car without meaning to. She sat there for a moment with the engine running. The lights still flickered. The concrete still smelled the same. A tee box had long since been cleaned away. There was nothing there to mark what had happened, no sign, no reminder, just an ordinary stretch of gray floor between two ordinary parked cars. She thought about a coffee cup, set gently on a hood. She thought about a voice that never rose. She thought about the kind of person who walks toward a problem instead of away from it, not because they do not feel the weight of it, but because they have made a quiet decision, somewhere along the way, about what kind of person they are going to be when it counts. Then she put the car in drive. She went home. She made tea. She called her mother, something she had been meaning to do for 3 weeks, telling herself she would get around to it, and never quite getting there. Her mother picked up on the second ring and said, warmly and without question, the way mothers do. Asterisk, I was just thinking about you. Asterisk. Sandra sat down at her kitchen table, her tea going warm in her hands, and talked for a long time. Some moments remind you what matters. And some people, without trying, without asking for anything in return, show you exactly what it looks like to be the kind of person worth becoming.